The office doors swung open, and in walked Olivia, a woman draped in a dark green silk blouse and tailored black pants. Her high heels clicked purposefully on the marble floors of the corporate headquarters. The buzzing glass and steel monstrosity, towering high above the city skyline, housed an empire built on billions. From the outside, it looked perfect, pristine, and powerful. But inside, within the sterile, controlled chaos of board meetings, high-stakes deals, and endless emails, Olivia was just another assistant to the powerful CEO, Ethan Richardson. To everyone who passed her by, she was nothing more than an employee, someone who stood at the back of the room, keeping the gears of the massive corporation moving. The world didn't know her true worth. She had carefully curated the image of someone who existed to serve, to support, to assist. And that's exactly what everyone assumed her role was. They couldn't have been more wrong. No one could see past the black attire, the neutral expressions, and the calm, composed exterior. No one saw her as anything but an anonymous figure. Ethan, the CEO of the Richardson Group, had grown used to this. He had come to rely on Olivia for everything, from organizing his meetings to keeping track of his correspondence. Her ability to stay ahead of things, anticipate his needs, and manage everything with grace had earned her his unspoken respect. But no more than that. She was the assistant, nothing more. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about her. He couldn't place it. Maybe it was the way she always seemed unflappable, calm under pressure when everyone around him panicked. Maybe it was the way she stood, always with her back straight and her gaze steady, the quiet strength in her demeanor. There was something about Olivia that suggested she was more than she let on, but Ethan never questioned it. He didn't need to. In the world of business, people like him didn't have to concern themselves with people like her. They had a job to do, and that was it. His world was one of excess, private jets, opulent dinners, global influence. But hers was one of quiet order, of knowing when to stay in the background, of being invisible when necessary. She was the silent architect of Ethan's success, but she was never given credit for it. He thought of her in passing. She was efficient, intelligent, and dependable. He never noticed that she was also extraordinarily rich. Olivia wasn't just any assistant. She was a secret in plain sight. Her wealth, her power, was hidden beneath the surface. While Ethan spent his time running multi-million-dollar companies, managing investments, and spending his nights in high-end lounges with investors and partners, Olivia spent her time managing a business of her own. She was no mere assistant. Olivia had inherited a vast fortune from her late parents, but she hadn't told anyone about it. It wasn't something she flaunted, something she advertised. It was something she kept to herself, knowing that her status as an assistant would keep her invisible in the eyes of the corporate world. Olivia wasn't someone who cared for fame, luxury, or recognition. She had lived a life of humility, having learned the true value of wealth when she saw how much her parents had given up to build the businesses they had. They were self-made, but the sacrifices were immeasurable. Watching them, learning from them, Olivia had inherited not just their money but their mindset. She was practical, careful, and deliberate. And now, she was sitting on more wealth than Ethan could even imagine. But why had she chosen to stay in the shadows? Why not take her rightful place among the corporate elite, flaunt her status, and command the attention that so many others craved? The answer was simple. Olivia wasn't interested in power for the sake of power. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone, and she had seen firsthand how wealth could corrupt, could blind people to the things that truly mattered. In her world, the pursuit of money wasn't about dominance. It was about control. Control over her own life, her destiny, and the ability to walk away from things when they no longer brought value to her. Ethan didn't know it, but Olivia had been silently controlling his life. She knew every move he would make before he made it. She'd been orchestrating his career in ways he couldn't begin to fathom. She knew who to trust, who to avoid, and when to push for deals that would ensure the company's future. And all the while, she remained in the background. Oblivious to the quiet powerhouse working behind the scenes, Ethan took her for granted. He thought of her as reliable, an essential part of his operation, but never anything more. That was about to change. The first time Ethan realized how wrong he had been was during a corporate crisis. A sudden legal issue threatened the company's reputation, and a series of high-level meetings were required to resolve it. Ethan's usual methods, intimidation, negotiating power, financial leverage, weren't working. The problem was too complex, too delicate, and too public. Ethan was scrambling, throwing money at the problem in the hopes that it would disappear, but Olivia knew better. She had been quietly watching, assessing, and plotting. When everyone else had given up hope, she made her move. She called in favors from her network, reached out to lawyers and financiers who owed her family. Within 48 hours, the issue was resolved, and the company was safe. Ethan, stunned, couldn't understand how it had happened. He had expected a team of high-powered executives to pull strings and close deals, but it was Olivia, his assistant, who had pulled off the miracle. He asked her how she did it, and she merely smiled, saying, "I have my ways." He knew it wasn't just luck, but he still didn't know who she truly was. It wasn't until a few weeks later that the truth began to unfold. Ethan had been invited to a lavish charity gala, a fundraiser where the city's wealthiest and most influential people gathered to celebrate their good fortune. Ethan, of course, was a guest of honor. Olivia was tasked with accompanying him, handling his schedule, and making sure everything went smoothly. But when they arrived, something unexpected happened. Olivia, who had always worn simple, understated clothes, walked into the room in a gown that shimmered like liquid gold. She wasn't just an assistant now. She was the center of attention. Ethan's jaw nearly dropped as the crowd parted for her. As they made their way to the stage for the opening speech, whispers filled the air. "Who is she?" people asked. "She's stunning. Who's she with?" Ethan couldn't believe it. The assistant he had known for years, the woman who had spent her time managing his chaos, had just become the most desirable woman in the room. Olivia wasn't just a secretary anymore. She was the woman everyone wanted to know. And then, the moment that would change everything arrived. Ethan found himself on stage, preparing to give his speech, when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Olivia, standing behind him with a small envelope in her hand. She smiled at him, but there was something different about her expression. "I think it's time for you to know the truth," she said quietly. And that's when the world shifted for Ethan. Olivia opened the envelope and handed him a document, a legal contract. It was the transfer of shares in the Richardson Group, shares that were held by Olivia herself. Ethan's eyes widened. "What is this?" he asked. "I've been quietly holding on to the majority of this company's shares for the past few years," she said, her voice calm, yet full of weight. "I've been your silent partner, Ethan. The truth is, I've always had more control over this business than you've ever known." The room went silent. Ethan's world tilted. Olivia wasn't just his assistant. She was the one who had been silently steering his empire. She was more powerful, more influential than he could have ever imagined. And she had done it all from behind the scenes, choosing to remain unnoticed, choosing to stay out of the spotlight. And now, as the truth came crashing down, Ethan finally realized something he had never understood before. The assistant he had taken for granted was, in reality, the true force behind everything he had. She was the one who had shaped his empire, his success, and his future. The power dynamics had just been flipped upside down. Ethan was left speechless, unsure of how to react. How do you respond when the person you least expected turns out to be the one with all the cards? Olivia had been right in front of him all along, quiet, composed, and unassuming. But beneath the surface, she was far more than just an assistant. She was the one with all the power. And as Ethan stared at the document in his hands, he realized that the woman who had always been in his shadow was now the one casting the light. Growing up, Olivia knew nothing but struggle. Her childhood was a far cry from the polished world she found herself in now. Raised in a small, unremarkable town, she had seen the raw edges of life, the kind of life where every penny counted, where the future seemed out of reach for people who didn't have connections or status. Her parents weren't wealthy by any means. They lived in a modest home, the kind that creaked and groaned under the weight of time and wear. But despite their financial limitations, they held a deep belief in the power of hard work and integrity. Olivia's father worked as a mechanic, while her mother took up multiple jobs, cleaning houses and caring for other people's children to make ends meet. Every morning they woke up early to ensure Olivia had a chance at something better, something beyond the confines of their struggling world. Olivia would watch her mother carefully fold the laundry at night, always with a sigh of exhaustion, and her father's calloused hands would still reach out to gently tuck her into bed, his lips whispering words of encouragement. But even at that young age, Olivia knew. She knew the sacrifices they were making, and she knew the world outside was much bigger and more unforgiving. Olivia's small town was one where dreams died early, where the weight of history was a heavy blanket that kept everyone grounded in mediocrity. No one expected much from the kids who grew up there. High school was where Olivia realized the divide. Her classmates wore the latest brands, talked about vacations to exotic places, and flaunted their wealth in ways that Olivia couldn't fathom. But she didn't let that discourage her. Instead, it pushed her to work harder, to rise above the limitations that had been set for her. Olivia had always been an exceptional student. Her natural intelligence stood out, and she quickly became known for her ability to pick up difficult concepts with ease. She spent her evenings studying late into the night, often under the dim light of a single bulb in the living room, while her parents rested. The truth was, Olivia wanted out. She didn't want to spend her life living in a small town, struggling to make ends meet. She had dreams, bigger ones. She imagined herself working in the world of high finance, surrounded by the kind of people who could make things happen, who could move markets and change lives with a single decision. The first break came when Olivia was accepted into a prestigious university on a scholarship. She was both excited and terrified. She didn't know anyone in the big city, didn't know the language of wealth or privilege that the other students spoke. It was a world so far removed from her own that she often felt like a stranger in her skin. At first, she struggled. She had never been around people who had private tutors, who drove shiny cars, and had summer homes. But she was determined to succeed, even if it meant feeling out of place. Slowly but surely, Olivia began to carve her niche. She studied harder than anyone else. She used her scholarship as a stepping stone, focusing on building the relationships that would later turn into invaluable connections. She worked multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet, juggling her studies with long shifts at cafes and bookshops. No one knew about her sacrifices. She kept her struggles hidden behind the polished exterior of a driven student. By the time Olivia graduated, she had earned top honors and doors started to open. But the real break came when she landed an internship at one of the most respected firms in the city. It wasn't much, just a small stipend, a few weeks of work. But it was enough. The firm was a place where the elite gathered, a place where power, wealth, and influence intersected. It was where Olivia would come face to face with the world that had once seemed so unreachable to her. Working at that firm was an education in itself. Olivia learned not just about business and finance, but about people. She learned that power wasn't always about making the most money. It was about control, about understanding how to move the pieces on the board, about who you knew, not just what you knew. But Olivia was smart, and she was patient. She didn't let the glamour of it all blind her. She spent years learning the ropes, quietly observing, understanding the business from the inside out. She moved up, slowly, steadily. From an intern to an entry-level employee to a trusted aide for some of the company's most influential figures. And then, one day, a chance came that would change everything. She had been working under a top executive who had taken a special interest in her. He saw something in Olivia that was hard to define. Her ability to anticipate moves before they were made, her unshakable calm, and her ability to understand the intricacies of the business in a way few others did. Olivia didn't talk much about her past. She didn't bring up the late nights spent studying with a flickering candle, or the years of working to pay for her education. She didn't want anyone to pity her. She didn't need their sympathy. Her focus was always on the future, So when the top executive, an influential man in the company, approached her with an offer to join his team on a much larger scale, Olivia knew this was it. This was her chance to step into the world she had always dreamed of. What no one knew, however, was that Olivia wasn't just working to climb the corporate ladder. She was already ahead of the game. By this point, Olivia had quietly started investing in various assets, real estate, and stocks. With her connections and her growing knowledge of the business world, she was beginning to accumulate wealth, significant wealth. She wasn't just a cog in the machine anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. But she kept her wealth hidden. She knew that if anyone found out who she truly was, it would alter how they saw her. Olivia wanted to build her future on her terms, without being defined by her background or her inherited wealth. So she continued to work in the background, taking on the assistant role with Ethan Richardson, the CEO of Richardson Group, knowing it was her entry point into the world she needed to navigate. For Olivia, this wasn't just a job. It was the culmination of years of hard work, the gateway to something bigger than herself. She had gone from struggling to the top, silently amassing power and wealth, and now she was poised to take control of the world that had once seemed out of reach. Little did Ethan know, the woman who worked for him had already reached the top. She wasn't just his assistant. She was his secret weapon. And the day would soon come when she would reveal exactly what she was capable of. In the world of high finance, power and privilege were the currency that defined worth. Olivia, despite her hidden wealth, had learned to navigate this world with the utmost humility. But no matter how carefully she played the game, her position as Ethan Richardson's assistant placed her in a constant battle with the societal hierarchy that still defined everything around her. Olivia's life, when viewed from the outside, was the epitome of grace and humility. Her office in the back corner of the Richardson Group's glass skyscraper was modest, far removed from the lavish, polished offices of the company's senior executives. Ethan's towering presence in the company often made her seem like a mere afterthought, a shadow against his brilliance. But she had learned to accept that. She wasn't there for the limelight. She wasn't in it for the recognition. Her eyes were on the bigger picture, her ambition quietly simmering beneath her calm exterior. Yet, the world around her often saw things differently. As much as Olivia had risen to prominence within the company, she was still looked down upon by many in the boardroom. The assumption was always that she was just a lowly assistant, someone whose role was to support, not to challenge or innovate. People like Sophia, the glamorous head of marketing, would often look at her with a mix of pity and condescension. Poor Olivia, still trying to get ahead by hiding behind a man, Sophia would whisper to her colleagues in hushed tones when Olivia was out of earshot. Sophia, like many others in the corporate elite, saw power as something to be flaunted. She would walk around the office in designer heels, her lips painted red, constantly reminding everyone of her elevated status. She enjoyed her wealth, her influence, and the way people catered to her. For Sophia, power was about control, about being above everyone else. She saw no value in humility or kindness, qualities that Olivia held close to her heart. The tension between Olivia's humility and the cutthroat nature of the company couldn't have been more obvious during a particularly high-stakes meeting. Ethan had just secured a significant merger, and the room was full of excited voices discussing the future of the company. Olivia, as usual, sat quietly in the back, taking notes, providing support where needed. But when the conversation turned to discussing the roles of those involved in the merger, Olivia's input, though essential, was dismissed with a flick of a hand. "You're just the assistant, Olivia. Don't overstep," one of the board members, Charles, said with a dismissive chuckle. The others in the room followed suit, some with thinly veiled smirks, others trying to maintain their professional faces, but failing to hide their disdain. Olivia didn't let it show, of course. She simply nodded and quietly stepped back. In that moment, a quiet rage brewed inside her. She knew her worth. She had more knowledge about the company's future than half the people in the room. Her wealth wasn't just in her assets. It was in her understanding, her strategy, her vision for what Richardson Group could become. But it was clear to her that no one in this room was interested in seeing her for who she really was. They wanted to keep her in her place, a silent, invisible player behind the scenes. The class divide was further exacerbated during a company gala. The glittering event was a celebration of another successful year for Richardson Group, and it was a night filled with champagne, laughter, and extravagant displays of wealth. Ethan, ever the charming and humble leader, walked through the crowd with ease, his charisma drawing attention wherever he went. Meanwhile, Olivia stood on the sidelines, blending into the background, content to observe. The sparkling lights, the grand chandeliers, the designer dresses, it all felt like a world she wasn't fully part of, even if she was standing among the elite. And yet, as the evening wore on, it became clear that Olivia wasn't just some lowly assistant. The more she interacted with people at the event, the more she realized how little they truly knew her. She was polite, but distant, a quiet presence in the midst of it all. But behind the humility, behind the mask of the assistant, was a woman who had worked tirelessly to get here, who had invested, saved, and navigated through the same ruthless corporate world with a quiet strength. She had a level of understanding about business that many people in the room lacked. She had seen how manipulation and greed worked, how power was wielded, and how others played the game to their advantage. But Olivia didn't want to play that game. She knew that the pursuit of money and power for their own sake was shallow. She wasn't like them. She didn't need the validation that came with wealth. She didn't need to flaunt her success. What she had, the true value she carried, was something deeper. It was in her humility, her quiet drive, and her innate understanding of people. However, this very humility was what set her apart from the likes of Sophia and Charles, who saw humility as weakness. For them, power was everything. It was about status, about having the control to walk into a room and make people bow to your influence. For Olivia, power meant something entirely different. It was about knowing your worth, understanding the game, and using your influence to uplift others, not just to rise above them. And this difference in perspective was what set the stage for the conflict that was bound to come. Ethan, unaware of Olivia's true power, continued to see her as his assistant, his helper, his support. He valued her work, yes, but he didn't fully realize how far she had come. She had the potential to be more than just his assistant, but in the eyes of the corporate world, she would always be limited by the title given to her. But what Ethan didn't know yet was that Olivia wasn't going to stay in the shadows forever. No, her time was coming. The world would soon realize that the quiet, humble assistant had more power, more insight, and more influence than they ever could have imagined. And when that moment arrived, it would shake the very foundations of the company and Ethan's life forever. The Richardson Group, once an empire of wealth, was suddenly on the brink of collapse. Ethan had been blindsided by an aggressive competitor who had leveraged an intricate series of financial maneuvers to destabilize his company. In the span of a few weeks, the value of Richardson Group plummeted. Debts piled up, creditors started knocking on the door, and the prestigious company that once seemed invincible was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Ethan, usually so composed and sharp, was now a man on the verge of losing everything. His pride, the very thing that had made him the successful businessman he was, stood in the way of admitting he needed help. He refused to reach out to anyone for support, especially to Olivia, his assistant, the woman who always seemed to know how to calm his nerves with a simple smile or reassuring gesture. What Ethan didn't know was that Olivia had been keeping a close eye on the company's financial statements for months. While her role as his assistant was meant to be behind the scenes, Olivia's sharp mind had always seen through the facade of Ethan's corporate strategies. She had seen the warning signs, risky investments, shady dealings, and overlooked debts, and she knew what was coming long before Ethan did. She had amassed her own fortune over the years, building wealth quietly through shrewd investments. As a result, she was in a position to help, though she had kept that fact hidden from everyone, even from Ethan. One evening, while Ethan stayed late in his office, scouring through contracts and legal documents, Olivia decided it was time to act. She couldn't stand by and watch him destroy everything he had worked for. She reached out to her network and orchestrated a deal with one of her secret investors, offering a solution to Ethan's financial nightmare. The catch, however, was that this deal came with strings attached. She knew that to save him, she would have to reveal her wealth, something she had kept hidden for so long. The next morning, as Ethan sat staring at the grim future of his company, Olivia walked into his office with an unexpected solution: a loan to cover the debts, a bailout that would save Richardson Group from bankruptcy. Ethan's eyes widened as Olivia laid out the terms, explaining how she had leveraged her own fortune to make this deal happen. Shocked and confused, Ethan struggled to comprehend what she was saying. "You have money?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. Olivia, standing firm and composed, nodded. She had been hiding it all along: her wealth, her skills, her true potential. But now she couldn't afford to keep it a secret any longer. The loan wasn't free, though. Olivia made it clear that if Ethan agreed, she would take full control of the company for a time, a condition that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He wasn't sure what to make of this revelation. His pride and sense of independence were deeply wounded. The idea of being indebted to her, of having to surrender control to the very woman he had always viewed as just an assistant, was almost too much to bear. But Olivia's eyes were steady, calm, and resolute. She wasn't asking for anything other than the chance to prove herself, to show Ethan that she had more to offer than just her position in his company. "You don't have to accept, Ethan," she said softly, yet firmly. "But if you want to save Richardson Group, you don't have a choice. This is the only way." The weight of her words hit him hard. This wasn't just about money. It was about pride, trust, and their relationship. Ethan stood in silence for a moment, his mind racing. He was at a crossroads. Would he swallow his pride, accept Olivia's help, and risk the dynamic between them changing forever? Or would he let his company fall apart to protect his ego? The twist was inescapable. Olivia had saved him, but now the real challenge was whether he could accept this new reality. She wasn't just his assistant anymore. She was his savior, and he didn't know how to process that. The catch was more than financial. It was personal. Ethan would have to confront his own arrogance, his pride, and the reality that Olivia, the woman he had always underestimated, had become the one to pull him from the depths of disaster. The power dynamic between them had shifted in a way neither could have predicted. What would Ethan do now? Would he accept Olivia's help and surrender control of his empire? Or would he let it all crumble under the weight of his pride? The first twist in their story was set in motion, and neither of them knew just how much it would change their lives. The tension between Ethan and Olivia had been simmering for weeks after the loan agreement, and the fine balance they had tried to maintain began to fracture. As Olivia stepped into the role of overseeing the company's operations, the shift in dynamics became more apparent. Ethan, despite his gratitude for her help, couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost control. His empire, once his sole domain, was now being steered by the very woman he had always seen as his subordinate. The power struggle between them grew more intense each day, but it wasn't just about control anymore. It was about trust. Ethan's pride clashed with his growing respect for Olivia, but he couldn't fully accept the idea of her being his equal, let alone a leader. Yet, Olivia never backed down. She ran the company with a precision and expertise that left no room for doubt. She was better at this than he had been in years. Her innovative ideas and sharp decisions began to turn things around, and the company slowly began to recover from its near collapse. The success was undeniable. But just as things seemed to be improving, a bombshell exploded in the press. A rival company, one that had been gunning for Ethan's business for years, managed to leak a devastating rumor. Olivia had been secretly working with them to sabotage Richardson Group from within. The accusations were wild and unfounded, but they were explosive enough to shake the very foundation of what Olivia had built. Headlines screamed across news outlets. "Assistant's secret deal with rivals exposed. Betrayal in the boardroom. Is Ethan's right hand his enemy?" The accusations were baseless, but the damage had been done. Whispers of betrayal spread like wildfire among the employees, investors, and even the media. Olivia, who had worked tirelessly to save Richardson Group and bring it back from the brink, suddenly found herself in the eye of a storm she never saw coming. Ethan, who had been clinging to his pride and ego, faced a dilemma that shattered his already fragile sense of control. In his eyes, Olivia was the person who had saved everything. She was the one who had rescued his company, and, by extension, his entire career. But now, the world was turning against her, and the rumors were too loud to ignore. Ethan, ever the protector of his empire, had to decide what to do: stand by the woman who had been his lifeline or fall victim to the pressure and public sentiment. The problem was, he was torn. He couldn't ignore the growing doubt in the back of his mind. What if the rumors were true? What if Olivia had been working with the competition, secretly undermining him for her own benefit? The conflict between his trust in Olivia and his fear of betrayal reached its peak when the situation turned personal. At a high-profile investor meeting, just days after the scandal broke, Olivia was accused outright by one of the major shareholders. "How do we know you didn't sell us out, Olivia?" the investor demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. The entire room fell silent. Ethan, who had always been the confident leader, now found himself grappling with a choice that would define not only his company, but his relationship with Olivia. Should he believe in her, defend her publicly, and risk losing his credibility? Or should he protect his image and distance himself from the woman who had saved him? Olivia stood there, her heart pounding in her chest as the weight of the accusation crushed her. She had always been loyal, always been the one to sacrifice for the company and for Ethan. But now, in this moment of crisis, she felt the world turn against her. She had no idea who had leaked the information or why, but the attack on her character stung deeper than anything else. She had put everything on the line for Ethan and his company, but now, in the blink of an eye, all of that was being called into question. As the meeting ended in chaos, with investors split between suspicion and disbelief, Ethan made his decision. He would have to confront the rumor head-on, and he would need to do it fast. The only question was how he would handle the situation. Would he stand by the woman who had risked everything for him? Or would he let her be torn apart by the very people she had helped save? As Olivia walked out of the boardroom, the weight of the world on her shoulders, she couldn't help but wonder. Had everything she had worked for been in vain? Was the trust she had built with Ethan as solid as it seemed? Or was it all just a fragile illusion? The conflict between them had reached its boiling point. The accusation of betrayal had ignited a firestorm that neither of them could ignore. Now they would have to face the fallout, and decide if they could ever come back from this. The world had turned upside down for Olivia. What seemed like a triumphant moment, where she had helped Ethan save his company from bankruptcy, quickly spiraled into a nightmare. The accusations of betrayal, though baseless, were relentless. Her name was dragged through the mud, with every possible news outlet speculating on her role in the scandal. Olivia was no longer just the assistant. She was the villain, the woman who had been playing both sides, the one who had fooled everyone. The first blow came swiftly. Investors pulled out, citing the scandal as a reason for their withdrawal. The stock price of Richardson Group plummeted, and Ethan's once thriving empire seemed to be on the brink of collapse once more. But this time, it wasn't just a financial crisis. It was personal. Ethan had to decide if he would stand by Olivia, but the pressure from his board and shareholders was overwhelming. Publicly, he distanced himself from her, trying to salvage whatever little remained of his company's reputation. The media turned on him too. They painted him as a naive billionaire who had trusted the wrong woman, and his image, once pristine, became tainted with doubt. Olivia, once the rock on which Ethan had relied, now felt completely alone. She was the scapegoat, the one left to take the fall. Her career, which she had worked so hard to build, was in shambles. Her name was synonymous with betrayal in the eyes of the public. As her phone rang with messages from former colleagues, friends, and even her family, she couldn't bear to face the truth. She had lost it all. Her personal life crumbled too. The friends she had made within the company, the people she had trusted, no one was there for her. They all stepped back, wary of getting caught in the scandal's wake. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had seemingly deceived everyone, including the man who had once trusted her with his life's work. Olivia found herself in isolation, both professionally and personally. She sat alone in her apartment, the silence pressing down on her. The weight of the betrayal, whether real or perceived, felt like an anchor that was pulling her under. Each day, the news cycle turned more toxic. Every social media post, every headline screamed accusations. Her self-worth, which had always been tied to her work, now seemed worthless. Ethan, too, was in a dark place. Though he had publicly distanced himself from Olivia, the truth was, he hadn't fully let go of the relationship they had. His heart still ached with guilt for the way he had treated her. But the fear of losing everything, the company, his reputation, had clouded his judgment. He kept telling himself it was all for the greater good. But deep down, he knew he had betrayed someone who had saved him when no one else would. Still, he couldn't escape the guilt that gnawed at him. At night, when the office lights flickered off and the boardroom doors shut, he couldn't stop thinking about Olivia. The same woman who had been his backbone was now forgotten by him in the face of scandal. For Olivia, the worst part wasn't the loss of her job, or the betrayal she felt from Ethan. It was the humiliation of having to watch her entire identity crumble in front of her. The world no longer saw her as the competent, self-made woman who had built her way from the bottom. Instead, they saw a villain, someone who had betrayed the trust of everyone around her. It stung in ways she hadn't prepared for. She had worked tirelessly for every step of progress in her life, and now it felt like all of it had been erased in a single moment. The deepest hit came when she stood in front of a mirror, looking at herself, barely recognizing the person staring back. Her confidence, which had been forged through years of struggle and hard work, had shattered. The reflection she saw wasn't someone who had stood by her own values. It was someone who had been accused of taking advantage of the one person who had believed in her. And as much as she wanted to fight the accusations, the truth was, she couldn't deny the way they made her feel. Worthless, invisible, broken. And yet, despite the pain, there was still a small flicker of something inside her. A voice that whispered, "You can get back up. You've been through worse." But it was drowned out by the overwhelming noise of failure and regret. Ethan, too, was at his breaking point. His empire was collapsing, and no matter how hard he tried to save it, the damage was too extensive. As the lawsuits piled up, the media attacks continued, and his company's board grew more hostile. He started to lose faith in his ability to rebuild. His once vibrant future, filled with luxury and control, now seemed distant. Ethan found himself at a crossroads. The woman who had once stood by his side, who had believed in him when no one else did, was now a shadow of what she had been. And he had been the one to push her away. But even as their worlds fell apart, the pieces of their fractured lives began to form a new, unspoken understanding. They had both lost everything they thought they knew, and somewhere, deep down, they knew that if they were ever to rebuild, it wouldn't be alone. The rock-bottom moment, though excruciating, was the beginning of a change, a realization that they needed each other more than ever before. It was a silent understanding, something unspoken, but deeply felt. But whether that realization would be enough to repair the damage and restore the trust between them remained uncertain. As Olivia sat in her empty apartment, watching the rain streak down the windows, the silence seemed to echo louder than anything else. And in the silence, she heard a voice, a tiny, persistent whisper that urged her to rise again. It was the first spark of hope she had felt in weeks. The journey ahead would be hard, but the question now wasn't about falling. It was about whether she could find the strength to stand again, no matter how broken she felt. The storm of scandal had barely started to calm when a new twist hit Olivia's life like a lightning bolt. Just when she thought there might be a way to rebuild her shattered reputation, the ground beneath her feet shifted again. It all began on a quiet afternoon, when a familiar face from her past unexpectedly arrived at her doorstep. It was her estranged brother, Thomas, whom she hadn't seen in years. His appearance, as sudden as it was, carried with it a heavy air of urgency. Olivia had no idea why he had come. She hadn't spoken to him since she moved away after their difficult childhood, filled with broken promises and unhealed wounds. But Thomas had always been good at one thing: making things complicated. As she opened the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Thomas wasn't just visiting to catch up. He was here with a message, and one that Olivia wasn't prepared to hear. "I've been keeping an eye on you, Liv," Thomas said, his voice low, his eyes scanning her apartment with an unsettling look. "The truth's been coming out, hasn't it?" She was confused. "What do you mean? What truth?" His eyes hardened. "You never told them who you are, did you?" Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about? You know who I am." Thomas leaned in closer, his expression unreadable. "You've been pretending, Liv. Pretending to be someone you're not. It's time the truth comes out." The words hit her like a tidal wave. Olivia tried to backpedal, her mind racing to make sense of what he was insinuating. "What do you mean I'm pretending?" she asked, trying to sound confident, but feeling her stomach tighten with dread. Thomas took a deep breath, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he handed her a folder. Inside were documents that she recognized, but never thought she'd see again. The papers revealed a different version of Olivia's past, a past that was buried deep within a shadowed history she had worked tirelessly to escape. The truth was far more complex than she had ever revealed. "Do you think Ethan will ever trust you once he knows the truth?" Thomas continued, his voice sharp and accusing. "You're not just some struggling assistant who worked her way up. You're not even who you say you are, Olivia. You've been hiding the biggest part of yourself for years." Olivia's hands trembled as she read through the documents. The past she had buried so deeply was now laid out in front of her. She was more than just the hard-working assistant. She was connected to one of the wealthiest, most influential families in the country, an inheritance that she had turned her back on years ago. Her father, a notorious businessman with a dark legacy, had left her a fortune. But Olivia had rejected everything about her past. She'd chosen to build her own life, far removed from the world of high society, because of the toxic relationships she had with her family. She had made it clear that she wanted no part in the family's wealth or the business empire her father had left behind. But the truth now threatened to surface. "What is this?" Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. The reality of what her brother was revealing was too much to grasp. Her past, which she thought was behind her, had now become an obstacle she never expected to face. Thomas's words hit her like a punch. "You think Ethan's going to be okay with all this when it comes out? The man you've been lying to, pretending to be someone you're not. How long can you keep up this facade?" Olivia's mind raced, her emotions shifting between anger and confusion. She had kept her true identity hidden for so long because she had wanted to escape the judgment, the expectations, and the corruption that came with her family's name. But now, it felt as though the very thing she had worked so hard to avoid was coming back to haunt her. Her brother's eyes narrowed, his voice cold. "You've been playing a game, Liv. And now the game's over. You can't hide who you are forever." Olivia felt her heart pound. This wasn't just about her relationship with Ethan anymore. It was about everything she had fought for. Her life, her identity, everything she had worked to build was now at risk. What would Ethan think when he found out? Would he still see her as the woman he had trusted? Or would he see her as nothing more than a liar, a woman with secrets too dark to forgive? The weight of the secret she had kept from everyone, including Ethan, was now unbearable. She had spent years running from the truth, hiding from the life she was born into. And now, it was all crashing down around her. How long could she keep this secret from Ethan, especially now that her brother had dropped the bombshell? Would the truth destroy everything they had built? Or was there still a chance for Olivia to make things right? As Olivia sat there, staring at the folder in her hands, her mind whirled. She had no choice but to confront her past, the family, the wealth, the power, and decide what to do with it. But could she be honest with Ethan? The man who had put his trust in her, even as she'd hidden her truth from him. Could she ever be the woman he deserved if she continued to lie about who she truly was? The moment of reckoning was upon her, and there was no escaping it. Olivia had to decide whether she would keep running from the life she once knew, or finally face the truth and risk everything she had built with Ethan. As Olivia sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, the weight of her brother's revelations settled heavily on her shoulders. The life she had carefully constructed, the relationships she had fought to build, everything felt like it was unraveling. Yet, as much as the truth about her past threatened to destroy her, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment she had been avoiding for years. It was time to face what she had been running from, to confront the hidden parts of her heart that she had buried so deeply. Ethan. She couldn't deny that her feelings for him had been real, more real than anything she had ever experienced. But what was it that had truly drawn her to him? Why had she stayed by his side when the temptation to reveal everything, to tell him the truth about who she was, had always been there? Olivia's mind drifted back to the first day she had met him. He was different from the men in her world. The ones who were part of the corporate game, always calculating, always looking for the next opportunity. Ethan was grounded, kind, and genuine in a way that made her feel like she could finally breathe. In the chaos of her life, he had been a steadying force, a man who saw her not for the wealth she had hidden, or the status she had rejected, but for who she truly was. That was why she had stayed. But now, the secret of her past, her family, and her wealth was threatening to tear everything apart. Olivia had never intended to keep her identity a secret for so long. It wasn't about the money or the power that came with her family's name. It was the fear of being judged, of being seen as nothing more than the daughter of a man who had built an empire on corruption. She had stayed in the shadows because she didn't want Ethan to look at her and see the same thing she saw when she looked at herself. A woman whose life was defined by the mistakes of those around her. But as the truth loomed closer, Olivia began to realize that the real reason she had stayed wasn't just because she had fallen in love with Ethan. It was because, for the first time in her life, she felt like she was enough. She wasn't the daughter of a corrupt businessman. She wasn't defined by the wealth she had turned her back on. She was Olivia, the woman who had fought for everything she had, the woman who had built her own path despite the odds. And Ethan, despite his own wealth and power, saw her for who she truly was. It wasn't her past that mattered to him. It was the woman she had become. But as the reality of her lies began to sink in, Olivia understood that her greatest fear was losing that connection. The love they shared was real, but the secrets she kept threatened to destroy it. It wasn't about the money or the status anymore. It was about truth, about vulnerability, and about facing the woman she had always been afraid to show the world, and Ethan. Olivia knew that in order to move forward, she had to confront the truth, not just about her family and her past, but about herself. She had to stop hiding behind the facade she had carefully crafted. Ethan had given her a chance to be something more, something real. Now, it was her turn to give him the same. The question that lingered in Olivia's mind was simple. Could she fully embrace who she had become and risk losing everything she had fought for? Or would she keep hiding behind the walls she had built, afraid that the truth would break the one thing she had finally found? Love? Olivia stood in front of the grand glass doors of the company's headquarters, her heart pounding with uncertainty. The decision she had made hours earlier was now staring her in the face. She could still feel the weight of Ethan's words, his hurt, his anger, and the look of betrayal that had crept into his eyes when the truth about her past came to light. But that moment, as painful as it was, had sparked something inside her, a fierce desire to rebuild, to earn back the respect and trust she had lost. As the sun set behind her, casting long shadows over the city skyline, Olivia knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just about her relationship with Ethan anymore. It was about something far deeper. Her own redemption. She had spent years running from who she truly was, from the family name that haunted her every step, from the wealth that defined so much of her life. But now, standing at the precipice of everything she had fought to protect, she knew the only way forward was to confront the past head-on. She had to prove that she was more than the mistakes of her family, more than the woman who had hidden behind lies for so long. She had to show Ethan and herself that she was worthy of the love they had shared, that she could be trusted, and that her actions from this moment forward would define who she was, not her past. Ethan's world was built on trust, something that, in her desperation to protect him, Olivia had shattered. She understood now that trust couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. It was about actions. It was about showing up, day after day, proving through every choice she made that she was no longer the person she had once been. It was about reclaiming the respect she had lost. Not only from Ethan, but from those who had always looked at her with skepticism. Those who had believed she was just another woman playing the game of wealth and power. The first step came when she reached out to the board of the company she had worked at, the one where her family's influence had loomed over every decision. She'd been avoiding them for months, knowing they were part of the very structure she had been trying to distance herself from. But now, it was time to confront that history. Olivia submitted a proposal, a plan to restructure the company's practices, to shift the focus away from greed and towards ethical business practices. She didn't want to hide anymore. She wanted to be seen for the woman she had worked so hard to become. She wanted to stand in front of them, not as a woman born into privilege, but as someone who had earned her place through her own hard work and integrity. The hardest part of this redemption journey, however, was facing Ethan. He had been her rock, her source of strength in a world that had always seemed so artificial. But now, she was standing alone, ready to prove that she could be the woman he had believed her to be. Even when she had doubts about herself. Olivia knew she couldn't just ask for forgiveness. She had to show him through her actions that she had changed, that she was no longer the woman who had kept secrets for fear of losing everything. She was ready to be vulnerable, to expose her flaws, and to rebuild their relationship from the ground up. Her first meeting with Ethan after the revelation of her past was filled with tension. He was still angry, still hurt, but there was something else in his eyes. A flicker of hope. He had always believed in her potential, even when she couldn't see it herself. Olivia understood that now. The path to redemption was long and difficult, but with each step, she was beginning to earn back his trust. Slowly, they started to rebuild their connection, one honest conversation at a time. The journey wasn't without its setbacks. There were moments when the weight of her past threatened to drag her back into the shadows, and moments when Ethan's doubts seemed too much to overcome. But through it all, Olivia stayed committed. She worked tirelessly to prove that she was capable of more than the life she had left behind. Her actions spoke louder than her words, and with every decision she made, she was reshaping her future. In time, Ethan began to see the changes in her. The woman who had once been lost in the world of power and wealth was now focused on making a real difference, on creating something that mattered. He saw her not as the product of her family's legacy, but as a woman who had carved out her own identity. And as they continued to walk this new path together, Olivia realized something important. Redemption wasn't just about earning back trust. It was about being at peace with who she was, regardless of what anyone else thought. It was about owning her past, her mistakes, and her growth. The moment she had been working towards finally arrived when she was offered the position of CEO at the company she had once worked at. It wasn't just a victory for her. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for. Ethan was there, standing by her side, his support unwavering. As she accepted the position, she knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter in both her personal and professional life. She had reclaimed her respect, her integrity, and, most importantly, her place by Ethan's side. The journey had been hard, but it had led her to a place where she could finally say she was proud of who she had become. And she knew that, together, they could face anything that came their way. Olivia had always prided herself on her independence, on the belief that her success was built on her own merit and hard work. She had spent years working tirelessly to prove that she was more than just the daughter of wealthy parents. Every project she completed, every deal she negotiated, every step she took was with the intent to create her own legacy, one that wasn't defined by her family's fortune, but by her own accomplishments. But as time went on, the cracks in her carefully constructed persona began to show. It was a slow realization, one that had been building for months, but only truly hit her during a dinner with Ethan, the man she had grown to love and trust. The conversation started innocently enough, talk of business, of life, and of their future together. But as the night went on, the subject shifted to her past. Ethan had always admired her strength, her determination, and the way she had risen above the limitations of her family name. But in that moment, something changed. Ethan asked her about the origin of her wealth. "You've worked hard, Olivia, and I admire that. But I know your family is well established in the business world. How much of it came from your own effort, and how much was handed to you on a silver platter?" It wasn't an accusatory question, but it made Olivia pause. She had spent so much time hiding the truth, pretending that her wealth was entirely the result of her own hard work. But deep down, she knew that wasn't entirely accurate. Her family's wealth had played a significant role in her rise to prominence. Her father's company had always been a safety net, one that allowed her to take risks and make moves that would have been impossible for someone else in her position. It was an uncomfortable truth that she had buried for so long. In that moment, as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she realized the extent to which her family had shaped her life. They had provided the foundation, the opportunities, and the resources that had allowed her to build the empire she now owned. But that wasn't the full story she had told herself, and it wasn't the story she had shared with Ethan. She had always wanted to be seen as someone who had made it on her own, someone who had earned every penny. But as she thought about it more, she knew she had been lying to herself, and to him. That night, after dinner, Olivia went home and reflected on everything. She sat alone in the quiet of her apartment, staring at her reflection in the darkened window, wondering how much of her life had been shaped by her family's influence, and how much had been truly her own doing. She had always known she was privileged, but she had never fully acknowledged the impact that privilege had on her journey. It was a sobering realization, one that made her feel vulnerable in a way she had never felt before. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself grappling with her emotions. She knew she couldn't keep hiding behind the illusion of self-made success. It wasn't that she was ashamed of her family's fortune, but rather that she had built so much of her identity on the belief that she had done it all alone. Now, it was time to face the truth. The next time she saw Ethan, Olivia decided to come clean. She knew it would be a difficult conversation, but it was one she needed to have. She couldn't keep pretending that she had built everything from the ground up. So, one evening, after a long day of meetings, she asked Ethan to meet her at a quiet cafe, one they had visited together in the past. There, she took a deep breath and started the conversation. "Ethan, I need to be honest with you," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. "I've spent so much time convincing myself that I built my success on my own, and in some ways I did. But the truth is, my family's fortune played a huge role in everything I've done. It wasn't just hard work. It was the foundation they gave me." Ethan listened quietly, his eyes focused on her as she spoke. When she finished, there was a brief moment of silence. "Olivia," he said, his voice soft, "I admire your honesty, and I understand why you felt the need to keep that part of your life private. But the truth is, it doesn't change how I feel about you. What you've built is impressive, regardless of the resources you had to start with. What matters is what you've done with those resources, how you've used them to create something meaningful." His words hit her like a wave. She had expected disappointment, anger, or even rejection. But instead, he had shown her understanding. It was a moment of clarity for Olivia. She realized that her fear of being judged for her family's wealth had been holding her back, making her doubt her worth. But Ethan's response reminded her that it wasn't the origins of her success that mattered. It was what she had done with it. From that point forward, Olivia stopped hiding. She no longer felt the need to downplay her family's role in her life. She began to openly acknowledge the privileges she had, but also to highlight the ways she had worked to make her name. She became more transparent with Ethan, sharing the parts of her past that she had kept hidden, and their relationship grew stronger because of it. Her family's fortune had always been a double-edged sword for Olivia. On one hand, it had given her opportunities she could never have dreamed of. But on the other hand, it had created a sense of guilt and insecurity, as though she wasn't truly deserving of her success. In revealing the truth, Olivia found the freedom she had been searching for. She realized that her worth wasn't determined by how much she had been given. It was determined by what she did with it. And with that newfound clarity, she embraced her past, knowing that she could move forward and create a future that was entirely her own. Olivia's reputation as a highly capable businesswoman had long preceded her. Having managed her family's empire with precision and skill, she had become the talk of the corporate world. People saw her as a natural successor to her father's legacy, a woman with the brains and ambition to lead the empire into the future. But what no one knew, what she had kept buried deep within herself, was that she had no real desire to take over the business. It was an expectation that had been placed on her shoulders since she was a child. Her family had always assumed that she would inherit everything, that she would take the reins from her father and continue the dynasty they had built. She had played along with this vision for years, doing what was expected of her, climbing the corporate ladder, running meetings, and signing deals. But the truth was far from what everyone believed. Olivia had never felt connected to the world of business in the way others assumed she did. She had never been passionate about the industry, never driven by the desire to accumulate wealth or power. Instead, her passion had always been in creative endeavors, design, art, and social causes. But she had kept that part of herself hidden, choosing to follow the path that had been laid out for her, rather than pursuing the path that truly called to her. It wasn't until the day her father sat her down for a serious conversation that the weight of her truth fully settled on her shoulders. "Olivia," her father began, his voice serious. "It's time we start preparing you to take over the business. You've shown incredible leadership, and I think you're ready to step into the role of CEO. We've been talking about it for years, and it's finally time to make it official." Her heart sank. The words he spoke were everything she had been groomed for, but nothing she had ever wanted. She had always feared this day would come, and now it had. Olivia knew that the moment she uttered the truth, things would never be the same again. She had spent so much time building the image of the perfect successor. But now, with her father's expectations laid bare before her, she realized she could no longer keep up the facade. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she looked her father in the eye. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I've been running the business for years now, and I know you think I'm the one who should take over. But the truth is, I don't want to. I've never wanted to. I don't have the passion for this world, and I don't think I'm the right person to lead it." There was a moment of silence, a stillness that filled the room. Her father's face was unreadable, his eyes searching hers as though looking for some sign of a joke, something that would tell him she was just playing a part. But there was no sign of a joke. This was the truth, raw and unfiltered. "Olivia," he said slowly, his voice softer now. "You've been at the forefront of everything we've done. You've helped shape this company into what it is today. You've worked so hard, and you have all the skills to be the next CEO. Are you telling me that you would just walk away from it all?" Olivia's heart ached at the disappointment in his voice, but she knew this was a decision she had to make. "Yes, Dad, I would. I've realized that this business isn't my future. I need to pursue what truly makes me happy, what fuels my soul." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. It was a turning point, not just for Olivia, but for her entire family. The legacy her father had worked so hard to build seemed to be slipping away. And for the first time, Olivia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. But it wasn't just her father who had expectations of her. Olivia's colleagues, her friends, and even Ethan, the man she had come to love, all assumed that she was destined to take over the business. She had spent so many years pretending to fit into that mold, but now she was ready to break free. The revelation didn't come without its challenges. Olivia's father struggled to understand her decision. He had always believed that family legacy was the most important thing, and he couldn't fathom why Olivia would turn her back on it. The pressure mounted as her father began to question her loyalty, wondering if she was truly committed to the family and the empire they had built together. "You don't understand, Olivia," he said one evening, frustration evident in his tone. "This business is not just a company. It's a legacy, a tradition. It's our family's name, and you're walking away from it. Do you know what that will mean for us?" Olivia's heart broke at his words, but she remained firm. "I understand more than you think. I know what it means to you, and I respect it. But it's not my legacy to carry. I need to find my path, one that's true to who I am, not just to the expectations of others." The decision was met with mixed reactions from the people in her life. Ethan, who had always been supportive, expressed his concern but also his understanding. He knew that Olivia's happiness meant more to her than any business or fortune. "Olivia, I admire your courage to follow your heart," he said, his voice gentle but full of respect. "But just know that I'm here, no matter what. I'm proud of you for doing what feels right." Despite the support from Ethan, Olivia couldn't shake the guilt that lingered in the air. Her father's disappointment weighed heavily on her, and she questioned if she had made the right choice. But as she took a step back and looked at the bigger picture, she realized that she couldn't keep living a life that wasn't hers to live. She couldn't continue to follow a path that didn't fulfill her. Olivia's decision to step away from the business was not just a rejection of her family's empire. It was an act of self-liberation. It was the beginning of her journey to find her true calling, one that had nothing to do with the wealth and power she had inherited. She had spent years searching for purpose in the wrong places, trying to meet expectations that had never been hers to fulfill. Now, she was ready to carve out her path, one that would bring her true happiness and fulfillment. In the end, Olivia's decision was about more than just leaving the family business. It was about choosing herself, choosing her passions, and choosing a life that was true to who she was. And in doing so, she found the freedom to build a future that was entirely her own, one where she could truly be the person she had always meant to be. Olivia had lived her life cloaked in mystery, her humble demeanor never revealing the true source of her immense fortune. To the world, she was the epitome of grace and charm, a self-made businesswoman who had worked tirelessly to build her empire from scratch. But what no one knew, not even those closest to her, was that the wealth she had accumulated was not entirely of her own making. It was a secret that had been carefully hidden for years, a secret that would now change everything. The grand reveal began one chilly evening at a gala held in the heart of the city. A lavish event where the city's elite gathered to celebrate business achievements, philanthropy, and prestige. Olivia stood in the spotlight, poised and confident, her designer gown flowing elegantly as she mingled with the crowd. She had just been announced as the keynote speaker for the night, a recognition of her contributions to various charitable organizations and the success of her family's legacy. But behind her composed exterior, Olivia felt the weight of the truth pressing on her shoulders, knowing that the time had come to reveal the secret she had kept hidden for so long. As the night unfolded, Olivia's mind kept returning to one particular person, Ethan. He had been by her side through so many of her struggles, offering support and love when she needed it most. And yet, despite their close bond, she had never fully told him the truth about how she had acquired her wealth. Ethan had always assumed that her fortune came from the business she had managed, believing she had inherited it all from her family. But Olivia's truth was far more complicated than that. She had built her life on a foundation of secrecy, and now, With everything about to come to light, she knew there was no turning back. As she took the stage to deliver her speech, she could feel the eyes of the crowd upon her, waiting for her to speak. The anticipation hung in the air like a heavy cloud. This was her moment to come clean, to reveal everything. Olivia cleared her throat, her voice calm but firm as she addressed the audience. "Good evening," she began, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Tonight, I stand before you not as the woman you think I am, but as someone who is finally ready to share the truth." There was a collective hush as the audience leaned in, eager to hear what she would say. Ethan, who had been sitting quietly in the back, looked up at her, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Olivia paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She knew this wasn't just a revelation about money. It was about the life she had built, the choices she had made, and the people who had been affected by those choices. "For years, I've allowed people to believe that my wealth came from my family's business, from hard work and dedication. But the truth is, my wealth came from something else entirely. Something that, until now, I've kept hidden from everyone." The room was silent. Olivia could feel the tension building as she prepared to share the one thing she had kept locked away in her heart for so long. "When I was young, my family faced a devastating financial crisis. My father's empire was crumbling, and we were on the brink of losing everything. In that moment of desperation, I was introduced to a man, someone who had the power and resources to save us. But the price of his help was high, far higher than anyone could have imagined." Olivia's voice wavered slightly as she continued, the weight of her confession starting to sink in. "This man offered to help my family, to restore our wealth, on one condition. He wanted me to marry him, to become his partner in both business and life. At the time, I was too young to understand the full implications of his offer, but I agreed." The crowd was stunned into silence. Ethan, who had been listening intently, felt a pang of disbelief. Olivia had never shared this with him, never revealed the depths of her past. "In the years that followed, I worked alongside this man, building his empire just as much as I helped my own family regain theirs. I became his confidant, his partner in every sense of the word. But what I didn't know, what no one knew, was that he was more than just a businessman. He was a man with a hidden agenda, a man who wanted to control everything in my life." Olivia's hands trembled as she continued, her emotions raw and exposed. "I eventually realized that the wealth I had amassed came at a great cost. It wasn't just about the money. It was about power, manipulation, and a choice I made that haunted me for years." Her confession was met with murmurs from the crowd. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Olivia, the woman they had admired and respected, had been living a lie. "But despite everything, I decided to break free from that life. I chose to take back control of my destiny, to build my future, free from the shadows of that past. The wealth I had gained through that arrangement, through the choices I made, was never truly mine. I am not the woman you think I am. I am someone who has worked tirelessly to create my path, to escape the legacy that was forced upon me." Ethan's heart ached as he processed her words. He had never imagined that Olivia's past was so complicated, so entangled with a man who had used her for his gain. As Olivia finished her speech, there was a long silence in the room. The audience was still processing the gravity of her revelation, their opinions shifting from admiration to confusion. But Olivia stood tall, her gaze unwavering as she looked around the room, awaiting their reactions. "I stand before you tonight, not as the woman who inherited wealth, not as the woman who had everything handed to her, but as the woman who chose to break free from the chains of her past, to reclaim her life and her future. And that is the true story of how I became who I am today." As the last words of her speech echoed in the room, Olivia felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had finally told the truth, no longer carrying the burden of the secret she had kept for so long. The truth had set her free, and though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew that she could now walk it with her head held high. The grand reveal was over, and Olivia had taken the first step toward healing, both for herself and for the people who had once looked up to her. The truth had come to light, and the world now saw her not just as a woman of wealth, but as a woman of strength, courage, and resilience. The weight of Olivia's revelation hung in the air like a thick fog, leaving the audience in stunned silence. Ethan, having heard the shocking truth about her past, felt a whirlwind of emotions flooding through him. He had always seen Olivia as strong, independent, and untouchable, a woman who had everything under control. But now, the cracks in her facade were laid bare, and Ethan understood that she had been carrying a burden much heavier than he ever imagined. As the evening wore on, the conversations around her speech were scattered, some filled with admiration for her courage, others laced with confusion or judgment. Olivia could feel the eyes of the crowd, some full of sympathy, others critical, as she made her way off the stage. She didn't expect to be applauded for her honesty. She only hoped that, by revealing her truth, she could finally start the healing process, both for herself and for the people who had trusted her. The night ended, but Ethan couldn't shake the gravity of what he had just learned. He couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of guilt and betrayal that clouded his thoughts. Olivia had loved him, trusted him, and yet she had kept such a monumental secret from him. Did she think he couldn't handle the truth? Or worse, had she been ashamed of her past? His mind raced with unanswered questions, but deep down, Ethan knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away from her. Despite the lies, despite the secrets, his feelings for Olivia had never wavered. He couldn't lose her now, not when she had just exposed the raw truth about herself. As Olivia made her way to the balcony for some quiet solitude, she didn't expect anyone to follow. She needed to process everything, to reflect on the bold choice she had made. It wasn't just the truth of her wealth, it was everything. The lies she had told, the decisions she had kept hidden, and the pressure of maintaining an image that wasn't truly hers. The night was cool, and the stars glittered overhead as she leaned against the railing, her mind wandering. "Olivia," came a voice from behind her. It was Ethan. He had followed her outside. She turned around, her eyes filled with vulnerability and uncertainty. She had expected him to be angry, confused, maybe even disappointed, but instead, what she saw in his eyes was something different: understanding, compassion, and a quiet sense of resolve. Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He took her hand gently, the warmth of his touch offering her a silent comfort. "I don't know what to say," he began, his voice soft. "I wasn't expecting that. All of it. I never imagined that your past was so complicated." Olivia's heart raced as she listened to him speak. The fear of being judged, of losing him, had plagued her since the moment she revealed the truth. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "I never wanted you to think that I was hiding something from you out of shame. I just didn't know how to tell you." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I get it now. It wasn't about shame, was it? You were trying to protect everyone, protect me from something that had nothing to do with us." He took a deep breath. "But I need you to understand something. This doesn't change how I feel about you. You're not defined by your past. You've shown me a strength I never knew existed in you. And that strength is what makes you who you are, not the money, not the business. It's your heart, your integrity, and the way you've rebuilt yourself from the ground up." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. The tears she had been holding back all evening finally began to fall, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. She had been so afraid of losing him, so consumed by her own guilt, that she hadn't realized how much Ethan had truly understood her. He had seen past the mistakes, past the secrets, and into the core of who she really was. Ethan gently cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "I don't care about the wealth or the business. I care about you. And I always will." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than any grand gesture could. Olivia felt a surge of warmth in her chest, a sense of belonging and acceptance that she had longed for. In that moment, all the fears and doubts she had carried with her over the years seemed to fade away. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would still be challenges, still obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone. Ethan was with her, and together, they could face whatever came their way. The emotional climax of their journey was not about some grand declaration of love or a sweeping gesture. It was about understanding, forgiveness, and the willingness to move forward despite the mistakes of the past. It was about building a future together, one where honesty, trust, and love would be the foundation. "I've spent so much time protecting myself, hiding who I am," Olivia said softly, her voice filled with conviction. "But I don't want to hide anymore. I want to build something real with you, Ethan. Something that's based on the truth." Ethan smiled, pulling her close into an embrace. "I want that too," he murmured against her hair. "We'll build it together, piece by piece." The emotional resolution was clear. Olivia and Ethan's journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Together, they would forge a new path. A future not defined by wealth or status, but by love, trust, and the willingness to face the future with open hearts. As the night unfolded around them, they stood there in each other's arms, knowing that no matter what the world might throw their way, they would face it together. The past had shaped them, but it would not dictate their future. They had learned that the strongest bonds were forged not in the absence of hardship, but in the courage to face it hand in hand. As the story of Olivia and Ethan unfolded, the emotional weight of their journey began to settle in. Their growth, individually and together, had been nothing short of extraordinary. From the moment they had met, to the twists and turns that tested their love and trust, they had both been through an emotional roller coaster. Through it all, they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before. Now, as the dust settled and they stood side by side, ready to face the future, a lingering question seemed to hover in the air. What if you had the power to reshape your life, to change everything around you, to walk a path you never thought possible? What would you do if you had hidden power? Power that others couldn't see. Power that only you knew existed. This wasn't just a question for Olivia and Ethan anymore. It was a question for the audience, for everyone who had watched their story unfold. It was a question about choice, about courage, and about the potential that lay within each of them. The camera slowly zoomed out as Olivia and Ethan shared a quiet moment together, hands intertwined, looking out at the horizon. They had faced their darkest fears, come to terms with their pasts, and emerged stronger for it. They weren't just building a future, they were creating something lasting, something meaningful, something that could withstand anything. As the music swelled softly in the background, the screen faded to black, leaving the audience with a lingering sense of wonder and possibility. The final narration, spoken in a calm, reflective tone, echoed in the silence. What would you do with hidden power? What could you achieve if you had the strength to embrace who you truly are and build a future without fear? The question hung in the air as the credits began to roll, giving the audience something to think about, something to challenge them. Would they take the leap, embrace their hidden power, and create a life they truly desired? Or would they remain in the shadows, hiding from the potential that lay within them? The final words were a call to action. Discover the power within yourself. The choice is yours. As the music gently faded out, the screen went dark, leaving the audience to ponder their own hidden strengths, the untapped potential that lay waiting, and the love they might yet find if they dared to step into the light. The emotional fade-out was complete, but the impact of the story lingered, leaving everyone with one question on their minds. What would they do with their own hidden power?